Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating.
Okay. Okay.
It's one of those cases that seems really simple from the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but, the more you get into it,
Yeah,
the more complicated it gets.
absolutely.
So we're looking at the 1980 murder of Carlo Ala in Italy.
Right.
And, you know, as always, we like to use kind of primary sources as much as we can.
Yeah.
So we're mostly working from his Italian Wikipedia entry.
Oh, wow. So we're going right to the source.
Yeah, right to the source as much as possible.
Yeah. Cool.
And this case, it's really interesting because on the surface, it just seems like, an ordinary night watchman,
Right.
kind of a random act of violence. But
Yeah.
the more you look into it, you realize that it's really, tied up in a lot of the political turmoil that was happening in Italy at the time.
Yeah. I mean, Italy's years of lead, man. That was
Yeah, exactly.
a crazy time.
So this is, late 70s, early 80s for folks who don't know it.
Yeah. A lot of social unrest, a lot of political extremism, a lot of violence.
Right.
It's kind of a powder keg situation.
Yeah, and this case really kind of encapsulates that.
It does.
So let's set the scene a little bit.
Okay.
So Carlo Ala, 58 years old at the time,
All right.
married guy, 3 daughters, working as a security guard
Mm-hmm.
at this factory called the Framtech factory in Settimo Torinese, Italy.
Okay.
It's January 31st, 1980.
So we're right at the, cusp of the new decade.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the craziness that comes with that.
It seems like a pretty ordinary night shift.
Right.
He's with his colleague, Giovanni Pagorin.
Okay.
And that's when things take a really dark turn.
And this isn't just any factory. We're talking about industrial Italy.
Right.
This is like the heart of the, economic engine of the country.
Yeah, and you say, this years of lead period.
Right.
I think it's important to kind of maybe give a little bit more context.
Oh,
there.
absolutely.
What do we mean by that? What was happening in Italy at the time?
So you have to imagine, a country that's undergoing these massive social and economic changes, right?
Yeah.
Rapid modernization, the economy's in flux.
Right.
And then you also have the legacy of fascism still kind of looming over everything.
Yeah, that's something that we often forget about.
Right. It's like this ghost that's still haunting the country.
Right.
And so you have all these different groups, all these different ideologies kind of clashing.
Right.
And it creates this really volatile atmosphere.
So who are some of the major players here? Are we talking about political parties? Or are we talking about more like, underground movements?
It's a mix of both, right?
Yeah.
You have the traditional political parties kind of struggling to maintain order.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have these extremist groups emerging on both the left and the right.
Okay. So it's not just, one side of the political spectrum.
No, this is full-blown societal breakdown. You have groups like the Red Brigades on the left, and then you have these neo-fascist groups on the right.
And these are groups that are willing to use violence
Oh, absolutely.
to achieve their goals.
They're not afraid to bomb, to kidnap, to assassinate.
It's got to be like, you wake up every morning and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're constantly looking over your shoulder.
Right. Okay.
Because anyone could be a target.
So back to that night at the Framtech factory,
Right.
they're on their shift change.
Right.
And all of a sudden,
4 armed individuals storm the guardhouse,
wow.
take Ala and Pagorin hostage.
And there's no warning or anything. It's just like,
Nope, it's a blitz attack.
wow.
They're completely caught off guard.
So they're taken hostage. Now we know that one of the other guards managed to escape.
Right. He gets lucky he's able to slick away in the chaos.
But for Ala and Polgorin,
They're stuck.
they're stuck.
And it gets worse.
Okay.
Because then 2 more attackers enter the factory,
Yeah.
and they start throwing Molotov cocktails.
What?
Yeah, they're aiming for the infirmary and the methane tank.
I mean, this is clearly, beyond just, petty theft or something like that.
This is about sending a message.
This is about causing as much damage as possible.
Exactly. They want to cripple the factory. They want to create chaos.
And they specifically identified themselves as a communist fire group.
Right. There's no doubt about their ideology.
Which is interesting because, we were just talking about all these different factions.
Yeah.
So now we're zeroing in on, a specific group here.
Right. And this tells us a lot about their motives.
So who are these guys?
So the group responsible is called the Nuclei Comunisti Territoriali, or NCT for short.
Okay.
And they're kind of a splinter group of Premillennia, which is another one of those left-wing terrorist organizations.
Okay. So they're like even more extreme than Premillennia.
Right. They're like the hardcore faction.
Wow.
And they specifically targeted factories.
Why factories?
Because in their ideology, factories represented capitalist exploitation.
Okay, so they saw them as like a symbol.
Right, the enemy,
Yeah.
the embodiment of everything they were fighting against.
It's interesting, though, because, you could also argue that attacking factories
Yeah,
is actually harming the workers.
right. That's the irony of it all.
Right.
They claim to be fighting for the working class,
Right.
but their actions often end up hurting the very people they're trying to help.
Yeah, I mean, if a factory gets shut down or, has to lay people off,
Exactly.
it's the workers who suffer.
And it creates this weird disconnect between their theory and their practice.
Right. They're so focused on this, grand ideological struggle
Yeah,
that they lose sight of the human cost.
absolutely.
So what happens next? They've taken the hostages, they firebombed the factory.
Right. So now it's time for their final act.
Okay.
They shoot Ala and Pagorin in the legs.
Oh, wow.
Ala's wound is fatal.
Oh, my God.
Pagorin survives, but he's severely injured.
It's just cold-blooded.
Yeah, it's a brutal way to make a statement.
So they flee. What happens after that?
Well, the public is outraged.
Yeah, I can
I
imagine.
mean, this is a working class guy just trying to do his job,
Right.
and he's killed in this senseless act of violence.
It's got to be terrifying for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. The whole country is on edge.
Right.
The police are under immense pressure to catch these guys.
And they do.
Yeah, and remarkably quickly.
Really?
By the summer of 1980, they've arrested the NCT's leaders.
Wow. That's impressive.
And with that, the group is essentially dismantled.
So they kind of, nip it in the bud.
Exactly. They prevent them from carrying out any more attacks.
So then what happens to these guys?
Well, they go on trial
Okay.
in 1985,
Okay.
and it's a huge trial.
Yeah, I bet.
90 people are
The
convicted.
90.
Yeah, and they receive a combined sentence of 360 years.
That's incredible.
And these are for various crimes committed by the NCT between 1978 and 1980 in Turin.
So not just this attack, but like...
Right, this is like their entire reign of terror.
What?
They're finally being held accountable.
Are there any like notable sentences that stand out?
Yeah, so Giancarlo Santilli,
Okay.
he was actually still a fugitive at the time of the trial.
Okay.
He gets 30 years
Just 30 years?
for his role in planning the attack and organizing the armed group.
Wow.
And then you have Federico Alfieri.
Okay.
He gets 24 years.
Okay.
And then the person who actually fired the fatal shots, Danila Mihalik and
Yeah.
Luciano Bettini, they both get 9 years.
So a range of sentences, but
Yeah.
all pretty significant.
Right.
So this trial, it's not just about, punishing these individuals.
No, it's about something much bigger.
Right.
It's about Italy taking a stand against terrorism,
Yeah.
saying that this kind of violence will not be tolerated.
It's a turning point.
Yeah, it marks the beginning of the end of the years of Lid.
So looking back at this whole story,
Hmm.
why should we care about this? What can we learn from Carlo Ala's case?
I think it's a reminder that, these grand political movements, these ideological struggles,
Right.
they always have a human cost.
Yeah.
And Carlo Ala, he was a father, he was a husband, he was a worker.
Right.
He was just an ordinary guy caught in the crossfire.
And it makes you wonder, what if he hadn't been working that night?
Right.
What if things had gone just a little bit differently?
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
It is.
It makes you realize that none of us are immune to the forces of history.
That's a good point.
We're all potential victims of
Yeah.
these larger conflicts.
And it forces us to think about, what are the things that we're willing to fight for?
Hmm.
And what are the costs that we're willing to bear?
Because there's always a cost.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Right.
And I think that's something that we often forget.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric
Right.
and to lose sight of the real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
So Carlo Ala's story, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
But it's also a reminder that, we have to be aware of the forces that are shaping our world.
Right.
And we have to be careful not to let those forces consume us.
Yeah, we have to find a way to resist them.
Right. To stand up for what we believe in,
Exactly.
but to do so in a way that doesn't dehumanize others,
Right.
that doesn't resort to violence.
Because in the end, violence only begets more violence.
That's a good point.
And it's a cycle that we need to break.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that these seemingly isolated events
Yeah.
are often connected to these much larger historical trends.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, what's happening around us right now that we might not even be aware of.
That might seem small or insignificant.
Right.
But could actually be harbingers of something much bigger.
Something to think about.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive today. But as always, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning.
And stay safe out there.
Yeah, stay safe.